So friends, let's get into the demo now. I'll demo about REST API methods and headers. I would also say that HTTP methods and headers. So I'm using one of my favorite tool called curl here. I'm not using other useful tools like Postman or anything. They are very useful and they all have nice GUI where you can visually see things. But for now, I'm just sticking to curl. So I'm going to use GitHub API here for this demo. I would use this API endpoints for demoing about get and post request. So using these APIs, you can retrieve resources from GitHub. You can create resources, etc. Resources like you can create repository, you can create pull requests, you can even merge, etc. So let's go and straight away hit on the GitHub API. So I'm using curl. So I would use method as get, then api.github.com. Let's hit on this endpoint and see what it gives. So you can see that this API endpoint gives a response here. So this is basically a root endpoint. I'm not interested on this. I'm rather interested on something else. So I'm interested on getting a user information. So I'll go to this resource called users. Then I'm interested in understanding about this particular user. This is my on GitHub ID. So when I hit on it, let's see what kind of a response it gives. Yeah, it gives a nice response saying all the user information, all other details. So you can observe that I've used method as get here. So I have specifically used it here for you guys to understand. So get, even if you're not providing get here, this command will simply work. So I'm just deleting it because get is the default HTTP method. So even if I use this, it's going to work. Okay. So next, let me try to hit on another endpoint called repos. So what I'm interested here is to understand all the repos present for this particular user. Let's hit on it and see what it gives. See, it is giving so many other informations like all the repository details. You can see that I have a repository called YouTube tutorials. So what this endpoint gives is it gives only public repositories. It do not give you private repositories. So when you hit on this endpoint, you can retrieve all the public repositories here. But I'm interested to fetch all the repositories, including both public and private. So what I'm gonna use is I'm gonna use another endpoint user repos, and I'm going to pass a user information here. So let me hit on it and let's see what kind of a response it gives back. So it is asking me to enter the password. Basically, curl is prompting me to enter the password. Let me enter a wrong password for the first time. So when I enter a wrong credential, as we expect, GitHub is giving you a response saying that it's a bad credentials. You need to enter the right credentials. So this is a very valid one. I just wanted to demo this. So next time, let me enter a valid credential. You can't see my credential. It's fine. So when you enter a valid credential, the API endpoint is returning all the repositories information here, including both public and private. So you can see that I have a repository called JS Learning and I have another repository called Git Learning, etc. So you can see the same information even in GitHub Web App as well. So let me go to my Chrome browser and log into a GitHub Web App. So if you go there, see, you can see three repositories here. It's the same information we have got through the API as well. So that's the beauty of API endpoints and the basic thing that we need to understand. Through API, a program can interact with another program. For example, like you are creating a third-party application, and this third-party application wanted to communicate to GitHub, and for that, what you would be relying on the GitHub API endpoints. You would code your application in such a way that your application can talk to GitHub through these APIs. And if you wanted to display all the repositories, you can use this endpoint and it can show all the repositories. So, like I have mentioned, this endpoint give you all the repos, including both private and public. So next, what I wanted to do is that I wanted to create a new resource. I wanted to create a new repositories. Let's see how we can do it. So we learned earlier that in order to create a new request, we generally use request method of type post. So I'm going to use request method as post, and I'm going to create a new repository. So when we create a new repository, obviously we need to supply certain information to GitHub, right? Like the name of the repository, if you wanted to give any description, and you whether you wanted to make it public or private. So you need to pass all this data to the server, right? So how do you pass normally? We already know that we pass it through the request body. So you need to mention the request body as well here. So for that, I would use the data tag. And how do we normally pass the data to server? We understood that it can be through either JSON or XML, but nowadays most of the application developers use JSON format, right? So here also I'm going to use a JSON format. So I'm going to write a small JSON. So I'm using a double quote here. Don't really worry about it because I'm using a command prompt in Windows 10. So I need to use a double quote. But if you have an application, assume that you have a web application through which you are uploading some data, then you would code your application in such a way that whatever information you are filling in the form would be converted into a nice JSON body, and that body will be sent along with your HTTP request. So I'm passing some information. So I'm passing the JSON. So what name I wanted to give? So my demo repo. So this is going to be the name of my repo, and I'll give one more information saying I wanted to make this as public. So I will use a boolean tag called private and I'll pass it false. So guys, one thing you need to make sure when you use CMD on Windows 10 is that you need to escape these double quotes. So I'm just using a slash here, backward slash here. Don't worry about it. You just, I mean, if you're passing JSON from your application, you won't use it. Just for your demo, I am using a slash here to escape the double quotes here. So the fundamental point is that you are hitting on the API endpoint, you are passing your username, and you are passing the JSON body here. And one thing I forgot to mention earlier is that, like I have entered the credentials earlier, I was using basic authentication here, which means that I'm just passing a basic username and password. There are other authentication mechanism also available with GitHub API endpoints. And also one thing to specifically note here is that GitHub is going to stop supporting username and password through API endpoints, I think by September 2020. Yeah, but here I'm using it just for the demo purpose. So you can use other authentication mechanism like token mechanism and other things. So they are all not in scope of this tutorial, but just for information I'm telling. So I'm using this repos endpoint and post method to create a repo. Let's see how this behaves. So I'm just going to press enter. So when I press enter, it should ask for a credential. So yeah, so let me enter my valid credential. So yeah, so you can see the kind of response it returned. So it created a new repo called my demo repo. So this is the beauty of it. You don't have to create from UI or anything. You can use curl to create a repository. So the idea is that if you are developing a third party app or anything, from there also you can create a repo. Very beautiful, isn't it? So I'll go to GitHub. I'll just refresh it and see whether it is reflecting in my GitHub account or not. Let me refresh it. Yes, see, you can see that there is a repository created here. So this is the beauty of it. You can use API endpoint to create resources. Wonderful. I hope you got it. So next thing what I wanted to tell you is about the headers. So you can pass headers through the request, right? So we understood that headers are present for both request as well as for response. I'll show you the response header later. Right now, let me show you how you can pass a headers information through the request. So if you are using curl, you would use hyphen h, and you can pass headers like content type. So let me pass content hyphen type. I would say it is nothing but JSON. So JSON. So if you don't pass specifically here, and if you use curl, it won't be considering content type as JSON. It would be considering as XML data. So if you wanted to, if your application wanted to send specific headers through the request, you can always do that with the HTTP request. So let me send this. So I'm not expecting a repo to be created successfully here because I'm passing the same repo name which is existing here. So I'm expecting a right kind of response from GitHub. Let's see how it is. So you can see that as we expected, GitHub is returning a response saying that repository creation failed. And what's the reason for it? It is also giving that name already exists on this account. Wonderful. It works as we expect. Now, let me give you some more information about headers. Let's see what really happens behind this request. Let us put a verbose tag and understand what all happened when you hit on this request. So through this information, we can actually debug or we can actually derive more meanings on it. So I'm hitting on it and I'm also passing a verbose tag here. So the objective is that I wanted to know what all happened when you hit on a particular request. So I'm hitting on it. Now you can see that there are a lot of verbose content here. So just for your own understanding, just go through it. So when you enter on it, it is trying to make yeah, this is because when you use data, it actually consider request method as possible. I don't have to really mention it, but for your understanding, I'm using it. So it is trying to connect GitHub now, the root endpoint. Then you can see that it is sending all those headers. Wonderful, isn't it? It's sending authorization host and content type. So this is what we specifically supplied it. So if you don't pass this specifically, it will be passing other content type. I can show you that later as well. So guys, I hope you understood the basic idea of request methods and headers here. So through using request headers and methods, you can either retrieve resources or you can create new resources. You can pass all the data to the server and you can do a lot of useful things. So one program would be able to interact with another program and you can create resources which is useful. So you can see that all the repositories has been created. Thank you guys for watching.